You mentioned at the start that policies have consequences. What current Texas policies might have negative consequences? Is there anything in our current policy structure that you see as a big negative factor?
Well, I think that there are things that can be done to certainly improve Texas's position and improve its competitive edge. One would be to phase out or eliminate the business margins tax. It's the only tax of its kind in the country. The compliance costs for smaller businesses are often as big as the tax bill itself because of how complex it is. That's something that should be looked at. Secondly, in the realm of government education, if you look at one area or advantage that California has over Texas is that California very early on, because of frustration with public education, allowed a flowering of charter schools. So that California has about double the national average of charter schools. I think the market share in California is about 4%. So 4% of public school-age kids are going to charter schools. Texas has a cap, which is very un-Texan. And so that we'd like to see more government school choice, more use of technology, blended learning, online learning. When you think about it, the current public school model is very much an industrial age model. It's very labor intensive, it's kind of wed in the past. And be that as it may, Texas still does better than the other big states. It's very important when looking internally and criticizing one's own performance that one does so with proper numbers. And what you often hear from apologists for government education in Texas is that, well, Texas is near the bottom on per capita spending. Remember what I talked to you about cost of living? Well, Texas has the 7th lowest cost of living in the country as of the 4th quarter of 2012. We used to be the 2nd lowest cost of living, but as the economy has been going gangbusters here, the price of housing has been creeping up because of demand. So we were at 90% of the U.S. average, now we're 92% of the U.S. average. Well, the #1 expense in public education is teachers. And if you can pay your teachers less because your cost of living is among the lowest in the country, then your per capita funding for education is going to look low, right? But let's look at the ultimate results. How many people are actually working in education here versus the biggest state in the union, California? Well, using the National Education Association's own statistics, the national affiliate of one of the unions that's suing here, claiming that we're not spending enough money, right? So let's look at the statistics. Instructional personnel to student ratios in the 2 biggest states. California is 21 to 1. So 21 students per instructional personnel. Texas is 13 to 1 ratio. Okay, and yet we don't spend enough money, and California does, and they're not suing California. Well, they're not suing California because their allies are in charge, right? The left is in charge there, so they must be doing okay. And then the Californians say, well, you Texans, you have the lowest percentage of adults with a high school diploma. How often have you heard that as Texans? You know which state is number 3? California. They're within the margin of error of Mississippi, for God's sakes. And yet they're, oh, Texas, number 1. Well, okay, let's talk about why. It's adults with a high school degree. Do you think that that is potentially impacted by foreign immigration? Yes. Do you think that might be impacted by the fact that in Texas there's still manufacturing jobs that you can support a family if you don't have a high school degree? Yes. That's why the poverty rate here is so much lower than it is in California. Let's look at what the schools are actually doing. Which state has a higher graduation rate? Texas does. You know, among Hispanics, Texas graduates about 10% higher as a proportion of the population than does California. It's about 77% versus 71%. It's about a 10% improvement, again, proportionally. It's very important when you look at stats to look at things proportionally, not just the difference between 77 and 71, right? So clearly something's being done right here. The last thing you hear is, oh, Texas is near the bottom on SAT scores. How many people have heard that? Right? You hear that all the time. You can't use the SAT as a proxy for educational achievement. Why? How many students take the SAT as a percentage of the population of students, let's say in, I think it's South Dakota? 2%. How many take it here in Texas? 58%. Do you know that Texas has the 14th highest SAT participation rate in the country? You know what that means statistically? The more people that take the test, the closer the test results get to the mean. If you have a state where only 2% take it, do you think you might have the highest SAT scores in the country? Yes, because only the elite students are taking the test, for gosh sakes. Texas, 58% take the SAT, California, 50%. That is a massive statistical difference and could account for all of the SAT differences between the two biggest states. You have to use a test that all students take, and that's the NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, math, science, reading, 4th and 8th grade. Among the biggest states, Texas is #1. Among the biggest states, California is last. Okay? So let's, again, we can be better, school choice, online learning, more charter schools, blended learning, but let's not criticize Texas education from the standpoint of ignorance or fall into the other side's narrative. Boy, you asked a good question. I just went off. Okay. What I would like to do, if you don't already get the TPPF emailing, please give us your name and email address, or if you'd like to have it go to a different address. And then for your edification, I will be signing and selling copies of the Texas model for $10 after we're through. So if anyone wants to buy a copy of the book I wrote as to why the Lone Star State is so awesome and the other big states aren't, then I'd be pleased to sell you a copy. Thank you for your time this morning.